So we're back to doing a video, and today I thought I would do a video on where I sell rare books. Now, some people know me by my moniker, the Rare Book Buyer, which I've used to good effect for, I think, more than 25 years or so. But some people don't even know where I sell books. I get these questions. So I thought I would use this video to go over methodically all of the places that I sell books. And hopefully this will give a little insight to my viewers or people getting into the business of all of the avenues that are open to you to sell rare books. Now, I do this, of course, a little idiosyncratically. There's no general rules. It's specific to every bookseller. But I'll go over all of the places as well as what types of books I place in each category, because I think when I segment the market like that, at least for my sales channels, that really affords me the opportunity to be a generalist rare book dealer, to buy a lot of stuff, and then to think, oh, I can put this book here or sell this book there. Now, we are fresh, first of all, off the New York Antiquarian Book Fair. So if you missed that, mark your calendars, of course, for next year. And for the report for the fair, because I'm sure people are going to ask me, well, it was a decent fair. There was a lot going on, of course, with the ups and downs of the stock market and threats to withhold financing from some important institutional customers. But generally, fairs are an excellent place to sell. The bigger problem is, of course, for most people, fairs are really expensive. They're capital intensive, and you may not have sufficient inventory for the fair. And for a fair like the New York Book Fair, you have to be an ABA member as well, which takes a few years. Of course, there are plenty of other fairs. But what if you can't do book fairs? Where else can you sell rare books? So I'll show you some of the books and where I'm selling them. Now, first of all, there is a company that a lot of booksellers use called Bibliopolis. And they're essentially a very specialized website and database company, sort of like a Shopify, but just for the book-selling community. Now, they have some pros and cons. Of course, I think the pros outweigh the cons for a site like that. The cons are they are an expensive site. It costs money to set up the website with them, and they charge a monthly fee. I think at a minimum it's about $180 or so. So not for everybody, especially when you compare that to other sites, like I said, their competitors like more general Shopifys and things like that. But their pros are that with the touch of a button, they link to all of the rare book databases over the entire web. So you can put up a very nice book and press one thing and it's on Bookfinder, it's on A-Books, it's on Via Libre, and all over. Now, I don't like to list all of my books all over the web like some booksellers do, which is perfectly fine. I'm sure they even have a higher sell-through rate than I do. Just personally, as a buyer sometimes of rare books, I don't want to see that book everywhere. It feels a little bit overexposed to me, sort of like a flaming hot Cheeto on a beach in Ipanema, just too much. But I do use my website and Bibliopolis selectively, and I'll give you an example of a book that I would put up onto Bibliopolis for people to see. Now, this is the 1598 edition of Chaucer's works, known as the Thomas Spate edition. Thomas Spate was an English modest school teacher, but he seemed to have had connections with some great luminaries of English society, even including men like John Stowe, the great English chronicler. And they put together this very wonderful edition of Chaucer's works in black letter in the late 1500s. And it's a very famous edition. It's got some very beautiful illustrations inside here of the Knight's Tale. It's also well known as one of I think it's the first book that has a glossary of Middle English words in it towards the back. So if you want to go from middling English to Middle English, this is the book that you should buy. Now, why would I put this particular volume up on Bibliopolis? Well, first of all, This is not a book I can easily sell to institutions. The reason being is it's not particularly rare, even for a book from 1598. When I go into databases like the English Short Title Catalog or I look on WorldCat, a lot of institutions own this book already. And that means that I can only really sell it into the private market. Now, I don't really have anybody for this, so that's the type of book, which I think is a well-known book, that I would put up online. Now, first, before doing that, I would check sites like Via Libri and ABooks to see how many copies are out there, because I don't want to put a book up that's got already 20 copies online. Or at least I want to make my book the least expensive of all of those copies, so that when somebody is looking for a copy of Chaucer, they will find my copy at a good price, or at least if it's the only copy. So this is a perfect example of a book that I would put up onto a Bibliopolis. And for those getting into the business, I really encourage you to check out that company online, because as I said, it's a great database for books, and with the push of a button, your book is shown everywhere, and also with the push of a button, you can remove it from your inventory when it is hopefully sold. So that's the first place I sell books, through my website and Bibliopolis. Moving on to a second site is a little bit surprising because not everybody uses this, but I use Etsy. Now, of course, Etsy is a site for homemade, handmade goods generally, but of course, nothing prevents booksellers from selling handmade books on there, and more booksellers are getting onto the site. Now, I find the community on Etsy is really wonderful. You get to send out pretty little books and nice packages with little bits of attractive tape and strings and gift cards, and the people are just really lovely and appreciative of the things they buy. And when I'm thinking about books that go onto Etsy, and the commissions, by the way, are quite favorable on there, I'm thinking of like giftable books, books, at least for me, in the sweet spot that still allows some profitability, but that people who want to buy a nice book for somebody graduating, or for a lawyer, or for a doctor, it's a really wonderful site. And I price my books generally in like the $500 to $1,500 sweet spot range for that. So this is the type of book that I would put up on Etsy. And this is a book by Gervase Markham called Masterpiece. Now, Gervase Markham was probably one of the perfect 17th century English gentlemen. He was a soldier and a poet. He had fought in the Low Countries, and he was a prolific writer, and he wrote on very practical subjects, on husbandry, if you were growing animals or caring for them, and crops, as well as horsemanship and subjects like that, really things that people in the 17th century could use. Now, the reason I like this for Etsy is because not only is it a wonderful 17th century book at a reasonably modest price, but it also has some fabulous illustrations there. You can see the insides of a horse, the circulatory system, or I think there's another charming illustration somewhere in here. So find it for a moment. There we go. The skeleton of a horse there. Now, if somebody's looking for a present for somebody who just graduated from veterinary school, or even environmentalism, because again, this is about really being in touch with the earth and crops in the 17th century, this is a book you might find that I would put up on Etsy that would be attractive to people. So I'll put my link from my shop down below if anybody wants to check it out. But Etsy is a really interesting community to sell rare books on, I find. Now I'm going on to another website, my great nemesis website. Actually, I really start to hate sometimes. That is eBay. Now, I shouldn't use the word nemesis or that I hate it, because I actually started on eBay, I think, 1996. So it's been a long time that I've used my moniker ADDY113, Addy113 on eBay. So it's sort of sentimental to me, and a lot of people actually use the site to get into the rare book business because, of course, it has still, even to this day, tremendous traffic, and you can still find, if you're buying things, very interesting material that pops up on that site. The thing that I don't like about it is that the commissions have skyrocketed over the years. You're paying something like 17% in book categories, approximately. And also, sometimes I find very difficult buyers on there, even abusive buyers sometimes. Now, I don't want to malign the entire community because there are some really good people on there, but for me personally, it's not the site it once was. But I still use it, of course, and I use it for what I consider very interesting and sometimes very valuable, but problematic books. And I'll show you an example of a problematic book right here. Now, this was described, or I described it recently to my colleague as being in what I call Betty Ford rehab condition. So this is in terrible shape. It comes from a library. It has to be completely rebound. Now, as a one-man show, more or less, I don't always have the time to rebind things. And I have a lot of books, and I'm flooding my bookbinder with books all the time. So I can't easily get to this. So I might want to give somebody a bargain on eBay who has more time and patience to put into something like this. Now, let me tell you about the book, because it is actually a really wonderful, valuable set and worth binding. This is known as Tucker's Blackstone. This was printed in 1803, the year of the Louisiana Purchase. Now, this is the American adaptation of Blackstone's Commentaries on the Laws of England, one of the great foundational works of English law. But it had to be adapted for American use in the early years of the United States. And it's infused with not only American law, but a Jeffersonian interpretation of American law, but an extraordinarily important set of law books for the early United States. But even more than that, this book actually is signed in each volume by John Breckinridge, who was a Kentucky man and eventually rose to become Attorney General under Thomas Jefferson. So it's not only one of the foundational sets of American law, but this actually belonged to the top of the food chain, of the legal food chain, the Attorney General under Jefferson. So clearly a valuable and interesting set. Now, if I put the time and energy into just a simple set like this, this would probably be a $7,500 set if it was rebound sympathetically to the period and, attractive bindings. And with the provenance in handsome bindings, it probably could get even $12,000 or so. But as I said, there is time and expense involved in getting the set looking good, probably, $2,500. So if I don't have that time and I get a lot of material in, I might put a valuable, intriguing set like this up on eBay, even at auction, get people all excited into bidding, and of course, let somebody find the treasure and do the work, even if I could make more profit by doing it myself. So that's a type of interesting but problematic material that I still use eBay for. Now, moving on to more expensive material. Now, as a rare bookseller in the ABAA, of course, my goal is to find fabulously rare and interesting material. And that I often save throughout the year for coupled catalogs that we produce. Here's an example of that thick catalog, which obviously takes a lot of time and energy. But I will show you an example of a book that might make it into the catalog, which I have in my hands here. And this is a 14th century manuscript. It's from about 1320 or so, if I remember. And it's on Cistercian law in the Kingdom of Castile. So this wonderful manuscript on vellum contains all sorts of statutes that monks might have used in their monastery. And of course, it's lengthy with all sorts of laws and regulations, because even, God needs a bureaucracy to manage things. Like Batman would say, holy bureaucracy, Batman. I should say Robin would say that. So this is a very valuable manuscript. It's not easy to find 14th century manuscripts. It's extremely scholarly. It really needs a very high quality, in-depth description, and it would appeal probably to an institution. So I save these type of books for my catalogs, which I put out twice a year. So also in line with catalogs, I'm about to reveal to you one of the great secrets of the book trade, and that is the Ex Libris listserv. Now, that is a listserv that is managed by the University of Indiana. And if you join that listserv, once a week on Tuesdays, they have commercial listings, and booksellers who put out catalogs and abide by certain protocol and rules that they have can actually list their catalogs, and it goes out to a lot of institutions who are on that listserv. A lot of curators see it. You want to make a very good impression. But I regularly put out things on the Tuesday listserv on Ex Libris. And booksellers getting into the field, if you save up your material and put together your first catalog, that's often an amazing place to put your first catalog, because you will get institutional clients curious about newcomers and materials that they offer. And as you get your name established and you're selling interesting material, they will come back and look at your catalogs and often, purchase directly from you. Besides Ex Libris and catalogs, I also target a lot of institutions. I look up various special collections online, certain curators in different fields, and I quote them directly. So I will show you an example of a book that I may quote somebody directly. Here's a very handsome book, and it is the Gospels in Russian, and it is from the library of Tsarsky Selo, which was the St. Catherine's Palace, the summer palace of the Tsars of Russia. So here you have the Gospel that has belonged to the Tsar's royal library there. So it's a beautiful book and quite an expensive book, and it's printed on glorious, lightly printed blue paper there. And I would target an institution directly, probably, for something like this. It's very specialized. It has a narrow market, but it might be somebody interested in Russian bookbinding, because this is probably a binding that was produced in St. Petersburg. It might be a Bible museum interested in a rare printing of the Bible, or it might be somebody who collects, an institution in Russian provenance. So this is the type of very specialized book that I would take time to look up a curator for and write them directly and tell them I have it, and hopefully get engaged with them and engage with them on it and possibly sell it. Another avenue that's popped up for a lot of people is, of course, social media. Now, I love Instagram. I love talking about books, and I even sell a lot through Instagram. Curators find you, and if you put a lot of passion and energy into describing something, people will reach out and they really engage with it, and sometimes they want to buy it from you. Now, there's certain types of books that I save for Instagram because I think they make wonderful reels, and TikTok too, of course, and YouTube Shorts and all that. I'll give you a couple examples of books that I save for Instagram because I think these type of books contain unique things or specific stories. And if you really highlight that and talk about it, then it gets people interested, and that may not be available through other types of listings like that. Now, here is a wonderful edition. It's printed in 1674 of Don Quixote de la Mancha. And the first edition, of course, of Don Quixote was printed in 1605. And I don't even want to think what a first edition of 1605 would get today. I think I saw a copy in the late 1980s get $1.5 million. So it's an extraordinarily expensive work of literature. But this copy, printed in 1674, is actually the first illustrated edition. And you can see some of the illustrations here of the book. I think I highlighted a couple here. And why I want to talk about this book on Instagram is because not only it's visual, of course, with these illustrations, but these illustrations are really fascinating because in the 18th and 19th century, Don Quixote is depicted as a tragic, romantic hero. That's generally the way I think we think of him today. But in this particular edition from the 17th century, they make a mockery of him. It's just ridicule. So a completely different interpretation of Don Quixote during the 17th century than we're more accustomed to today. And I think when I show the illustrations, on Instagram, and I talk about how these illustrations were made, where they were derived from, and why they're so fascinating in the history of Don Quixote and the history of art, then somebody may say, wow, that's really interesting. I never thought about that before. They may like, they may direct message me, and they may be interested perhaps in buying a book. It also gets me passionate to even talk about the book and gain customers that way. Here's, since I love Instagram so much, I'm going to do another book that I might put on Instagram here. This is a very interesting 18th century libretto for an opera, and it's on Queen Dido of Carthage, of ancient Carthage. And I think that if you were in the 18th century in Bourbon, Spain, in one of the grand theaters, these were probably printed in small numbers for, some of the guests of the theater to follow along with the performance. And the reason I'm talking about this in the context of Instagram is this is printed in 2 languages, in both Italian and Spanish, probably for the audience, members of the royal family, of course, in Spanish, but other musicians and people in the play might have come from Italy. And one thing I love about this book, which I can never highlight in a description anywhere else, so it wouldn't get any notice, is at the end here we have 2 printer's marks in the opposing languages of Italian and Spanish with the fine, and one of them has the sun, and one of them has the moon. And I don't think I've ever seen a book, at least from my memory, where we have 2 final printer's marks. I just find that so utterly charming that for a book that's so specialized that I might not have an outlet for, somebody may find that tiny little detail rather charming and then buy the book from me. Now, there are also, besides these sales channels that I regularly use, other sales channels, of course, which I think about or starting to explore. Maybe you've had some experience with them. You can even share it with me. People all the time tell me, well, what about Catawiki? This is like an auction site where they have an expert online. It's a little eBay-like, but they have expertise involved. And Catawiki has really grown in the book category. So I know people who sell on that. I know a lot of people buy on that. I haven't explored it myself, but it's on my mind to look into that possibility. And another up-and-comer, at least in the book world, maybe they're doing fantastically well in the world of coins and sports collectibles, I think, is What's Not. I also get offers from them to join their community, and that is a live sort of auction, social media type company. So totally different format. I thought I might explore that and see where that goes. But these are some of the many, many avenues where you can sell rare books. You're not limited to one. And as I said, you have to do what works for you. And I love doing it in this segmented way where I put particular books in different categories, whether eBay, Etsy, online, to institutions, because I think that gives me a really good opportunity to sell to many different types of people. So let me know about your selling experiences, and I appreciate you watching this video. And don't forget to click subscribe, of course, and tune in for some more insights into the world of rare books.